Josephine resigns herself to her fate after a farewell supper at the Luxembourg. She takes her seat in a traveling carriage, weeping copiously and sobbing aloud. Her dog Fortuné, Joseph, Junot, citizen Hippolyte Charles, aide de camp to Adjutant General Leclerc, and citoyenne Louise Compoint, accompany her. The maid is served at the same table with her mistress and dressed in the same style. Her room in the Rue Chanteron is not that of a servant. It is better furnished than that of her mistress, with curtains and portieres of oriental chintz, alabaster candlesticks mounted in gilded copper, several figures of cupids and shepherdesses, and a handsome Regency bureau with copper fittings and a marble top. It has been suggested that there was something mysterious in Louise Compoint's relations with Josephine. She seems, however, to have been merely a confidant with whom her mistress thought it well to be on good terms, and Josephine continued to pay her a pension till 1805, in spite of the rupture that took place subsequently. During the journey, which seems to have been prolonged somewhat unnecessarily, Junot made the best of his opportunities with Mademoiselle Louise, and Josephine, though, to judge by the sequel, she found Monsieur Charles by no means indifferent to her own charms, is said to have been irritated at the preference shown to her favorite. The travelers had set out at the end of June. On July 8th, they were approaching Milan, and Napoleon, who was obliged to meet the advance of Wurmser's army, implored Josephine to join him at Verona. "I shall need you," he wrote, "for I'm going to be ill." She preferred, however, to await his return in Milan. He hastened back to her, and after 2 days of rapture and caresses, the great crisis of Castiglione was upon him. The difficulties and perils of the situation could hardly be overstated. The question was not so much how to avoid defeat as how to escape destruction. Yet while busily dispatching orders for the mustering of his divisions and working out schemes to minimize the shock of impending disaster at this crisis unparalleled in his career, when fortune seemed about to forsake him, when his prestige was at stake, and he himself for the first time seemed to have lost confidence in his resources, he found time for a long love letter each day. "Ah, it were better to show me some of your faults, be less lovely, less graceful, less tender, less kind, but never be jealous, never weep. Your tears drive me distracted. They set my blood on fire. Come to me here that we may at least be able to say before we die, we had so many days of happiness." And the next day, and the next, and every day that they are apart, he breaks out into the same frenzy of passion, showering imaginary kisses and caresses upon his idol from afar. He orders, commands, entreats her to come to him, if but for a night, an hour. Josephine, who has grown somewhat more submissive, feeling vaguely on the soil of conquered Italy in the presence of the enthusiastic army, that he is of the race of chieftains to whom it is well to yield at least a semblance of obedience, makes an effort to join him, and then begins a strange progress through endless lines of soldiers, one day a fugitive, the next the heroine of a triumphal entry, now received with regal honors by the magistrates of the New Italy, now under the fire the Austrian batteries. Carriages are overturned, impeded by the debris of victorious or disbanded armies, and a love drama is enacted to the beating of drums, the whistle of bullets, and the flaming of bombarded cities. When she was with Bonaparte, he was all day at her feet as before some divinity. When absent from him, post after post was dispatched with letters to her from each of the obscure villages whose names he has immortalized. He sent letters in which declarations of tenderness, confidence, and even gratitude are mingled with jealous imprecations and frenzied expressions of passion upon her worldly expert nature. He lavishes all the youthful ardor of the young man of 26, whose life has been chaste thereto, and these outpours outpourings are the wail of unsatisfied desire, exasperated by illness, fever, and incessant mental labor. Half unconsciously, the expression of his passion is tinged by his recollections of La Nouvelle Eloisa, and his burning periods borrow an added glow from Rousseau's pages. Though his passion was absolutely sincere and in no sense a pretext for fine writing, yet he too had loved in his manner, had learnt the formula, and could speak of love in no other language. In those days he was a son of Jean-Jacques, and like all those who have plucked the periwinkle blossom, his heart retained its perfume forever. The periwinkle blossom was unfortunately not at all to Josephine's taste. She was of a different generation, a different country, a different education, a more artificial temperament. Bonaparte's perpetual rhapsodies wearied and annoyed her. It was delightful, of course, to be loved so deeply. At first it had all the charm and interest of novelty, but it became fatiguing after a time, and the want of tact, the crudities, the inexperience of youthful passion offended her mature and more fastidious senses. There were, of course, certain compensating advantages: presents from municipalities and princes, offerings from the generals, commissions from contractors. Lavish as was her expenditure, Josephine was never mercenary, wasteful, and improvident, always open to temptation and perpetually tempted. She often accepted out of mere civility, just as she bestowed out of mere caprice. Obeying her instincts in such matters, she was only dimly conscious of wrongdoing. Nevertheless, she so contrived that Bonaparte should be kept in the dark. She knew him to have scruples. It seemed strange to her, judged by the standard of her own circle and the society in which she had lived. But such as he was, she must make the best of him. Soon after her arrival, she had expressed himself very severely about a box of medals Josephine had received, and she had been forced to return them. Thenceforth, such matters were kept from him. If he had suspicions, Josephine, who secured accomplices beforehand, was always ready with some adroit lie to account for pearl necklaces, diamond parures, valuable pictures, and priceless antiques. These were not the only secrets of which Bonaparte was ignorant. He scarcely knew of the existence of Monsieur Charles, adjutant to Leclerc, who had traveled from Paris with Josephine. Monsieur Charles had remained at Milan, in the streets of which he showed to great advantage in a smart cavalry uniform, and whenever the general was absent from the Palazzo Ciboloni, Monsieur Charles appeared. Josephine indeed declared that Monsieur Charles only came to amuse her, talk to her, to make her laugh, that the intimacy was purely platonic. Monsieur Charles was a lively young man, robust and athletic, and remarkably lithe and active in person. He had the most imperturbable assurance, never spoke without a jest or a pun, and was an adept in all the feats of strength or skill, and a master of drawing-room pastimes, mystifications, and caricature. He was the link between Josephine, who was always in want of money, and the contractors who imagined that Josephine's influence might be of use to them. In this capacity, he showed a light-hearted liberality, a frankness, a gaiety that compared very favorably in Josephine's eyes with Bonaparte's austerity in such matters. The general, however, became suspicious of Monsieur Charles, as he had been of Murat. Monsieur Charles was arrested, it is said, probably only on the grounds of his dealings with the contractors. However this may have been, he left the army and returned to Paris, where through Josephine's intervention he became a member of the Compagnie Baudin and made a great fortune as a contractor. Monsieur Charles was a distraction after Josephine's own heart. He came from Paris. At Paris she loved, Paris the gay, the noisy, the frivolous, the licentious. She wanted the help of a Monsieur Charles to endure the ennui that oppressed her. "I'm bored to extinction," she wrote to her aunt. Yes, everything bored her. Her young husband's love, Milan, Genoa, where the Senate received her like a queen, Florence, where the Grand Duke greeted her as his cousin, Montebello, where she held her court, Passeriano, and even Venice, all Everything wearied her except Paris. And yet, when Bonaparte at last set out for Paris, she did not accompany him. She had a fancy to see Rome, or at least said so, and it was not till a week later that she rejoined her husband in the Rue Chatelaine, Rue de la Victoire, in the house through which she had ordered furniture and decorations amounting to 120,000 francs. The house Bonaparte bought some 4 months later for 52,400 francs. Thus, for a mere caprice, she renounced the glories of the triumphal journey through Italy and Switzerland and the public entry into Paris on the arm of the man with whose name the whole country was ringing. A month after Bonaparte's departure from Milan, he was still alone. She arrived at last at the end of December. Although Napoleon no longer felt that frenzy of passion which Josephine had at first inspired, his wife was still the one woman he really loved. This he publicly avowed. I love my wife, he told Madame de Staël. He was constantly with her, and was not concerned to hear it said that he was extremely jealous. She was no longer beautiful. She was nearly 40 and looked her age, but what of that? To Bonaparte, she could not grow old, and though the first flush of passion was over, he retained so warm and grateful a memory of his first love that Josephine, in spite of all that was to come, remained the creature he had loved above all others, the only woman who had held absolute sway alike over his heart and his senses.